Hello again, YouTubers, on with SpongeBob 101 back here again on the SpongeBob channel. Nickelodeon has finally dropped the next 7 SpongeBob Kamp Koral episodes on Paramount Plus. Again, it is a Paramount Plus exclusive, so if you guys haven't watched it, make sure to go check it out. Today we are reviewing the episodes What About Meep and Hard Time Out. When an unsatisfied anchovy strays from his brothers, SpongeBob and Patrick must help him find his true identity. Then, SpongeBob is sent to timeout on behalf of his buddy, so Patrick does what he can to rectify the situation. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Off with What About Meep? I really enjoyed this episode, slightly more than the sister episode, which is actually Hard Time Out. But let's go through what happens here. This episode is focused on the anchovies, so we see, well, a lot of the anchovies here. And we also see a cool new locale in Kamp Koral, the baseball field, which is nice. I always like new places. There's one really goofy part where they throw the baseball bats into the air, and all of the bats land on Patrick, causing Patrick to look really goofy, but also kind of in pain. And there's like other parts where they're just showering together. I wouldn't want to shower in that kind of situation. They're diving into Lake Yucky Muck together, and there's this cool part where they form a meep formation. So the point of this episode is the plot centers around this anchovy here. So this anchovy, instead of saying meep, he says moop, clearly wanting to be different. And you know, his fellow anchovies don't really see eye to eye on that. So he decides to, you know, there's this cool part where they they break out in song, and this is really cool because they are sock puppets. Okay, they're not sock puppets, just puppets. Singing the meep song. So meep, moop, meep, moop. There's so much meep and moop in this episode. It's I'm pretty sure eventually someone's gonna count how many times they say meep and how many times they said moop in this episode. I'm not gonna do that, but yeah. So this anchovy decides to leave the cabin. He goes around saying moop, around, you know, going to Pearl, which is always cute as usual, and then he ends up in front of the outhouse where SpongeBob is painting a painting of Patrick at the outhouse. So yeah, I'm not sure why SpongeBob is doing that, but it's, again, super random. And they decide to help out this anchovy. SpongeBob somehow has spent like, I don't know what it was, a summer at Anchovia, I believe what it's called. So he knows how to translate anchovy language into English. And this anchovy is named Chovy. Wow, how creative, right? Okay, but still, it sounds a pretty cool name, Chovy. And this anchovy, Chovy, really doesn't want to be like his fellow anchovies. He wants to be unique. And this gives rise to SpongeBob and Patrick offering to help Chovy find his new personality. So the only the catch here is that Patrick says that he does not want Chovy to be like Patrick, essentially. And there's this really funny looking still here where Patrick is so frustrated, and this ends up becoming a painting on the cabin wall along with that previous painting where Patrick comes out of the outhouse. So yeah, SpongeBob shows Chovy this book of photos about all the different personalities SpongeBob has tried before, like this emo guy, cowboy, even a clown, some soft toy, a cheerleader, and even this one. This one reminds me of the SpongeBob movie, by the way. SpongeBob movie game cover. That's really, really cool to see. We also have Tom Kenny here. SpongeBob pretending to be Tom Kenny. It's usually the other way around. So that's cool, from Big Birthday Blowout, as well as literal sponge taped to a sheet of paper. How cool is that? However, Chovy wants to become like Patrick, and again, this is to the ire of it really irks Patrick, right? And eventually Chovy moves on to laughing like SpongeBob, being cranky like Squidward, and even playing Squidward's clarinet. You gotta give him props for being so skilled, you know. Eventually Sandy comes along, and SpongeBob asks Sandy to show Chovy a little bit of Texas. So they start line dancing, and all goes well until like Chovy has to breathe because there's no water in Sandy's suit. So yeah, there's this cool scene where Sandy has to flush Chovy out of her suit, which again, it's, you know, really, really cool. So there's a couple other things like going to Larry, being a weightlifter, being a chef with Plankton, and Plankton sends Chovy back in a pizza box, which of course anchovies on pizzas are a thing. and that's not very nice to see. What's even worse to see is that Patrick literally wants to eat that pizza which Chovy is on. So ouch. So there's also other scenes like Chovy becoming Mr. Krabs, or pretending to be Mr. Krabs, pretending to be a baby like Pearl, pretending to inflate himself like Mrs. Puff, and eventually they kind of give up. They don't know what to do. But then Chovy comes across this mop head and puts it on his head, turning it into a wig. And suddenly the night sky shows up. Very starry, bright night, and he's standing on grass from like I don't know where. Jellyfish carry him up, and he's bouncing along, bouncing on various jellyfish, floating in the air. So yeah, he returns to his cabin, and everyone is shocked at what Chovy is right now. So guess what? Instead of making him feel unique, they literally just whip out like wigs, and all of them have wigs now. So that kind of makes Chovy no longer unique, and therefore Chovy just removes his wig, takes out a pillow, lays down on the ground, and falls asleep. Very, very interesting episode, I gotta say. This poor anchovy just can't get a break, being unique. Overall, I'll give this episode a 9 out of 10. I really enjoyed it. It was very funny at times, and it's a great exposition on characters, again, we don't see often in the main series, because the main series is very heavily focused on the main characters, right? And anchovies are just known as those groups of anchovies, literally, who just go around saying meep. And I'm glad that we got a variation of that in this episode. Moving on to Hard Timeout. I didn't really like this episode as much as the previous one, but regardless, let's take a look at what's happening here. The initial premise of this episode is SpongeBob and Patrick just fooling around, but then Patrick becomes really dehydrated. So he goes into Mr. Krabs' cabin and jugs and downs one of these jugs. It turns out that the contents of that jug were a ship in a bottle. So it is the ship in a bottle, a model of the SS Carpus, which turned out to be the first ship that Mr. Krabs ever sailed on. So SpongeBob was like, oh no, what are we gonna do right now? So SpongeBob tries to get the ship out of Patrick's tummy, but he fails. It does come out, but then it breaks apart, unfortunately. And then this is the moment where Mr. Krabs comes back. And while SpongeBob is frantically trying to put that ship back together, Patrick, in the most silly way possible, opens the door for Mr. Krabs and then escapes. So Mr. Krabs forces SpongeBob to take the blame for ruining his prized ship in a bottle, and then he is sent to the timeout room. I gotta give Mr. Krabs props here. Mr. Krabs is pretty kind. He literally gives SpongeBob a pillow, and also tells SpongeBob to grab some snacks from outside if he wants to. But this doesn't really help much, because SpongeBob goes a little bit kooky, starting writing counting the number of seconds that has passed on the wall, and doing all sorts of really weird things, right? But this is when Patrick comes back. Patrick wants to bust SpongeBob out of the timeout room, but SpongeBob, pretty honorable, I gotta give him that. He doesn't want to get busted out, because he wants to finish that timeout, because he's taking the blame for Patrick's mistake. And, he just turns Patrick away. Patrick doesn't want to give up, though, so he keeps coming back, and there's this part where he comes in with the laundry cart and pretends to be a ghost and scares the living lights out of SpongeBob. And SpongeBob then hangs him on the clothes rack or the clothesline and just puts him out to dry. I thought this was really epic. Okay, so we also have that part where Patrick just tries to, get a giant mollusk to rip the wall off the room. And this only results in Patrick getting his head sliced up. I don't know about you guys, but I thought this was pretty gross. Comment down below, did you guys think this was gross or funny? I mean, it's kind of cool, but at the same time, the way he rearranged it, and just like, oh man, why? It's so painful. Patrick decides to go on a crime spree. He wants to make himself get into the timeout room this time. So first he topples the trash over. Doesn't work, because Mr. Krabs finds a candy bar and just, yay, that's great. He unleashes a bag of urchins, but somehow Mr. Krabs is not angry, because the urchins help to clear out the trash like a vacuum cleaner. And then now we get to what I think is the coolest part of this episode. Patrick turns the outhouse into a hot rod. Man, this is cool. So Patrick drives the hot rod all the way into Lake Yakimuk, and when he returns to shore, he's like, is it something along the lines of like, is it time for me to go timeout yet? And that doesn't give him a timeout. What gives him a timeout is, in his frustration, he literally takes his necktie and just smashes it on the ground, and that's abuse of camp property. So Mr. Krabs throws him in the brig, to Patrick's delight. So Patrick goes to the timeout room and just sees SpongeBob. Now, SpongeBob has gone completely bonkers here, and I didn't really like this second part. I would say like the last 4 minutes, because this is the part where SpongeBob has gone completely mad, and Mr. Krabs is kind of shocked too. Patrick tries to snap SpongeBob out of it, but it turns out SpongeBob has his new version of Patrick made out of that pillow, and it's basically a mummified fluff ball with Patrick's face drawn on it. Very creepy, but you know what? There's a brawl. So they fight, and they fight out duel to see which Patrick is supreme. Of course, the real Patrick is supreme because, Patrick versus a non-living pillow, probably Patrick will win, right? So Mr. Krabs brings a fan in to clear the dust, and, as the hype dies down, both of them get back together, SpongeBob and Patrick just walk out of the room. And then later that day, when Mr. Krabs is remaking his ship in a bottle, he needs glue. And you know who gives him the glue? That thing. Man, it's so creepy. So that causes Mr. Krabs to completely freak out, and he runs into the timeout room himself and locks himself in. So yeah, that's how the episode ends. It's kind of a strange episode. I'll give it a 6.5 out of 10. I like the hot rod, but I like the ship in a bottle too, the antics there, but I didn't like the last part of this episode. So 6.5 out of 10 I think is decent. It's okay, it's not a bad episode, but it's also not like a fantastic episode either. So that's all I have to say about this episode. Comment about below what you guys thought, and make sure to subscribe, like, favorite, comments, etc. Keep right here on SpongeBob 101. We have episode 8's review coming real soon in a couple of hours, so make sure to stay tuned for that. So till next one, see ya.